So this was presented to Planning and Zoning Commission at their June 10th meeting, and they made 3 recommendations, or should I say a finding and a couple of recommendations. First, the proposed amendments would appear to significantly increase, potentially fourfold, again from 18 to 84. And I have to comment again, Bill and I had several conversations about this and verified by Michelle, that because you need to do a title search and a record search on each of the parcels to determine if they were an existing parcel on January 1st of 1997. Each of these properties would have to be researched in order to get an accurate accounting of what the potential impacts of the passage of this ordinance would be. The current land division potential within 1 mile of the city, generally fragmentation of ownership and increased residential development on the periphery of the city can create potential impediments to the ability of the city to grow over time in a logical and orderly fashion. This type of development can also increase the complexity and difficulty of transportation planning and increase demand for public services. If you look on the new slide that's up here, Mike made this slide this afternoon. Again, you have the city limits, you have the area of city impact, you have the 1 mile periphery, and now it's been overlaid with transportation corridors. So as you can see, there is significant development potential in each of these transportation corridors. Impacts on transportation, impacts on public infrastructure was a concern of planning and zoning at that time. You will recall that several years ago there was a discussion, and again, this periphery is not intended to be the ring road concept, but you can recall the discussions about if there was to be some sort of a bypass, how would we go about doing that? And it was met with some reluctance by property owners and by the county commission whether or not that was a feasible thing to do at that time. So again, and that's with the development being regulated by the current county ordinance. So if you provide these development opportunities, the chance for more intense development in that area of the county would make it extremely difficult to have any sort of a bypass, because there's just going to be more development, more houses, smaller lots, that sort of thing. Secondly, recommendation. The commission believes that if the county desires to adopt the proposed amendments, that this would potentially be an appropriate time to consider a renegotiation of the area of city impact boundaries to provide greater protection from the potential impacts of the proposed amendments. Again, the black dashed line is the area of city impact. The most critical area is right here. We are very close on the eastern border of the city. We have some areas where we've got quite a bit of flex, and in this sector of the city, of course, we're really surrounded by the University of Idaho. Not a lot of wholly owned or independently owned private property. This sector right here, the same thing. But in the northeast sector and the southeast sector, there really isn't a whole lot of room out there. As indicated at the Planning and Zoning Commission, I think Jerry Schutz, the acting chair of the commission that night, indicated that he recalled, and I believe was on the Planning and Zoning Commission as perhaps a couple of our council members, when the area of city impact, as a result of the Latah case, Latah versus Ada County, I believe, essentially redefined what the city's rights to regulate development in the area of city impact were. And at that point, the county and the city negotiated a deal, if you will, that would reduce the size of the area of city impact to be realistic, more realistic as to when the city would reach the boundary of the area of city impact within a 20 to 50 year period, I believe. The county adopted the city zoning code in that area to be administered by the county. So planning and zoning, one of their proposals was maybe now is the time to meet, if the county wants to proceed with this, maybe now is the time to meet to see if the city's fears, or concerns can be addressed by merely expanding the area of city impact to a distance which might provide the city assurances that orderly city expansion can be met, as Bill indicated. So that was their first recommendation. Second recommendation, the commission would recommend that the proposed new land division requirements not be adopted within the area of city impact to reduce the likelihood of property fragmentation immediately adjacent to the city boundaries. So what the Planning and Zoning Commission would like is assurances, hopefully in a ordinance fashion, from the county that if the area, well, whether the area of city impact is agreed to be expanded or not, that the county specifically find that the new ordinance, if it is passed by the county, would contain a provision indicating that areas within the area of city impact, properties within the area of city impact, would not be subject to the new ordinance. So that essentially, I hope I haven't misstated anything. You have to come up here, Michelle, if you would.
Michelle, would you identify yourself for our records too, please?
Hi, Michelle Fusen. Thank you for having me tonight. All I wanted to say was there's a potential that the Board of Commissioners could go to hearing on this as soon as the middle of July, not August. And so I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. If you don't mind me speaking about the area of impact for a minute too. The current division code in the area of impact is still the old 40-acre rule. And so the potential for divisions in the current area of impact is very high compared to the surrounding adjacent county property outside of the area of impact. And so in assessing whether a change, the county is not at this time proposing to make any change to the area of impact, but in the future, and it sounds like there were some recommendations from the Planning and Zoning Commission to potentially try to renegotiate the area of impact, we would have to analyze which ordinance would actually have more impact, because my initial assessment would be the new proposal would actually allow potentially fewer divisions in the area of impact than what is probably currently allowed. And so I assume that they probably weren't privy to that information. I didn't attend that meeting, but it is a different code that we're talking about that currently applies to the area of impact. That was the only clarifications I wanted to make. Thank you, Gary.
Council, have any questions for Michelle or Gary about Dan?
For Michelle. How does Moscow's area of impact compare to the other cities in the county?
It's different than all of the other cities in the county. The Moscow area of impact is smaller than all of the other cities in the county, but the city of Moscow, certain parts of their code apply. So their zoning code, their subdivision code, the trailer park code, there's a number of different codes that we've adopted that are city codes, whereas in all of the other cities in the county, it's the county code that applies. So.
And I guess what triggered the idea of the changes in the, did it begin with the Planning Commission or citizenry bring it to them, or how'd this all begin?
About 3 years ago, we went through 2 years ago, finished a modification of our comprehensive plan. During the time that we were reviewing the comprehensive plan, a number of people in the county wanted to be able to do more development on their property. The other thing that was happening concurrently was that the USDA Soils Manual was changing. And so a number of people were telling the Planning Commission that they would like to be able to provide parcels so that their family members could come and live by them. And that was the message that was received by the Planning Commission at the time. So after they went through and finish the modifications and review of the comprehensive plan, the first thing that they decided to look at was the land division policy. When looking at that, their focus really was trying to find a way to allow more divisions to accommodate families. However, you can't just accommodate families because that's unconstitutional. You have to apply it equally to everyone. So they started looking at other kinds of ordinances. They looked at that. What they were looking at were ways to try to bump up the density of buildable parcels, but still maintain the integrity of the comprehensive plan. And so that was really their goal. The first thing that they looked at, and they spent about a year on, was a cluster ordinance. And the cluster ordinance was essentially allowing a much higher density than what this proposal is, but requiring certain distances to houses and having very specific requirements about where people could build. In the end, no one liked that. The public that was coming to our meetings didn't like that. The Planning Commission and the people who talked to them, none of them really liked it. So we abandoned that and started over. What we came up with was modifying the soils provision, because that would potentially help us whenever we were going to have to look at it anyhow on the USDA modifications to the soils manual, but also allow a bump up in density. However, they didn't want that to be outside of the provisions of the comprehensive plan, so they put provisions in there to do things like require shared driveways and to limit the building sites on buildable parcels, to require that the building sites be in accordance with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan, like what Gary had previously stated. They took that to public hearing on June 4th and then forwarded a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to approve the language as written, but forwarded a recommendation that the county commissioners have their own public hearing, in part to try to accommodate the comments from the city of Moscow, because they had gotten them that day and wanted to give you guys an opportunity to give comment.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Michelle? Yes, Wayne?
Michelle, give me the definition of what's productive and non-productive soil.
It's a good question. Whenever the code was written in '97, the Planning Commission came up with what they did in defining productive and less productive soils was go through the soils manual and make determination on how many bushels of wheat per acre certain types of soils would have, what the timber index was for certain types of soils, and if the soils were either steep or very wet. They didn't want people building in those areas. And so they listed those as productive soil types. And they literally went through the soils manual and gave every soil type a ranking, either productive or less productive.
If I may. It's interesting that as you go along with that definition and then you go to your section 8.01.11, the conveying parcel must have areas that would enhance or protect the goals of the comprehensive plan to preserve the county's rural character, and the acquiring parcel is not to contain active farms, ranch, or forest grounds, floodplains, wetlands, or natural hazard areas. That almost doesn't leave much left.
The idea
It's
is
pretty exclusionary, isn't it?
the idea is that the receiving parcel, if building permits are going to be transferred, would be in compliance with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. So in lieu of a soils provision, now the parcels actually have to try to enhance the comprehensive plan of Latah